Well, how you doing? It is Friday, the 31st of October, 2025. So, among other things, happy happy Halloween, happy 17th anniversary of the Bitcoin white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto, and happy ongoing truce/ceasefire that's currently sort of holding up in Gaza, with almost daily occurrences of Hamas breaking the ceasefire, being followed by Israeli retaliation, and then reinstatement of the ceasefire after that's done. And typically that happens after a little bit of pressure from U.S. forces or whoever it might be that is saying basically, no, give it another chance and wait for it to have another effect and see if it catches on. When in fact, we know full well that what's happening is actually not really following the peace plan at all. Call it a peace plan, the ceasefire plan, because these are all violations of the plan. All the ceasefire violations, the crossing the yellow line violations, the fake recovery, stage recovery of taking bodies that have been previously stored in some kind of refrigeration facility only to be buried, supposedly. We've seen them being covered literally on the drone footage from the Israeli drone. Hamas terrorists covering up a body bag with remains, allegedly reportedly of some remains of a hostage. I don't know what else is in that bag. There seemed to be quite a lot in that bag, to be honest. It's like, what do they find? Like multiple bodies and send parts of it. It's grotesque, honestly. They reburied it and staged the recovery in front of the ICRC people. And the ICRC people deny that they know anything about the staging of the recovery, but that's visibly not true. If you've seen the footage that also aired on Channel 12 here in Israel, you can see that, in fact, hello there. I see you. Hi, Lauren. Hello. Um, you can see in the footage that was aired on Channel 12 that actually there were ICRC people there the entire time that they brought out the body from the pile of dirt. Right, so they might not have seen, maybe, I don't know, they might not have seen the initial covering of the body bag in the main sort of hill that they were excavating. I mean, not hill, the hole that they were excavating that they made to put the body underneath the earth of. But they very clearly saw the Hamas operatives, and the person that was specifically using the bulldozer dump the body on top of, basically in front of them on the ground, and then covered it in front of them with more earth, and then pretended to rediscover it underneath that pile of dirt. Right, when it was clearly in front of them on the ground. It was in front of them in the bulldozer. It was carried out of the bulldozer by people at the body bag, carried out, put on the ground right in front of them. They could have just stopped right there, but no, they had to cover it with earth again, right in front of the ICRC people who saw them doing that. It's on video. The same ICRC people who were on the same video moments later. And if you watch from the beginning of the video all the way through, you see the whole process. One shot from video drone or drone video, and you can see the Hamas then, removing the earth and suddenly discovering that there's a body bag there. It's just, they're grotesque. So that's obviously a violation. Now you can say, well, that's not technically a violation of the ceasefire deal. They did recover the prisoner. That is a violation of the ceasefire deal, because forget the fact that they're abusing the remains of a dead hostage. which is, again, grotesque beyond description in many ways. And it means that they knew where the body was before they recovered it, because they obviously brought it out to that facility to bury it in order to, you know, recover it twice, right? So they knew where those remains were before, and that means that they should have handed them over before, because according to the agreement, they were supposed to have handed over every living hostage and every remains of every dead hostage that they knew about within 72 hours of the agreement. But the fact that they didn't shows you that they were in fact not doing what they set out to do, right? They're not doing what they agreed to do. They took it upon themselves to basically change the rules and not give the remains of those 72 bodies, of those hostages and their body and the bodies of the dead ones, right? Not just the living ones, but the dead ones too. They failed to give those back within the 72-hour period. Like, they didn't even come close, right? What does that tell you? It tells you they never had any intent to follow the spirit of the law, right? They were clearly violating the agreement. I mean, they literally did it, right? They quite factually did not do as they signed that they would do. We're not talking about like a minor violation of some small agreement or agreement between, you know, something relatively minor as a civil offense. Not even a civil offense, a civil infraction, or just failing to live up to an agreement. We're talking about the return of dead bodies to their loved ones. One of the most basic things in human being behavior, right? Ensuring that the loved ones of dead hostages can have some closure at the very least. But no, that's not what they chose to do. They chose to do the exact opposite of the kind of behavior that would normally require. They went out of their way to make the experience miserable and painful for the loved ones of the deceased. Now, I don't know about you. To me, that reeks of bad intention. That reeks of people who are doing everything they can to actually cling to power, as opposed to giving it up according to the letter of the law, or the letter of the deal, I should say. It's not the law. They are clearly violating the spirit and intent and the letter of the deal. And they should therefore pay the consequences. We're not talking about, like I said, a small civil infraction, disagreement between two parties, or a difficult situation between two parties that is just like, oh, that's no big deal, we can get over that type of thing. We can work that out in a friendly kind of way. No. That is a major problem in the very first phase of the agreement, which Hamas has repeatedly said it has agreed to. It says it has agreed to phase one. Well, phase one includes, right at the very top, right, the return of the hostages alive and dead. So not doing that is a clear violation of the hostages part of that deal. By the way, the very, very first step in the plan is actually probably the last one that will actually happen and take hold, which is the de-radicalization of the Gaza Strip, which obviously is not something you can just do by wishing a wand over the situation, right? It's, waving a wand, right? You can't just expect that to happen overnight. What is more likely to happen is that will actually take generations to happen. Hopefully, it'll happen faster, but you need time to re-educate all the people who have been brainwashed into believing their hateful ways for as long as they have. So until that part is done, the deal is anyway dead in the water because there is no deal that will actually bring around peace currently. There's not, that's not a thing. I know Trumpies want to say there is. Trumpies, Trumpeters, Trump fans. And look, I give him all the credit in the world for making this deal happen as far as it has. Him and Bibi worked obviously very well together to get a lot of other world leaders to also sign on to this. Basically, the entire world has signed on to this. The only people who haven't are Hamas. I guess Iran, who cares what they say? They're the instigators. They're the pit boss of Hamas. So, basically, Hamas is the only party relevant to this in the immediate situation that did not. Well, actually, Hamas itself signed it, right? So, the fact that all the parties signed it that are relevant, namely Israel and Hamas, first of all, and obviously the United States and all the other countries that pretend like Hamas is an organization they can work with. That tells you everything you need to know. Right? They made a huge effort. They got a huge deal done. And now all of those parties are being tested exactly like I told you was going to happen. By the way, exactly like a lot of other analysts have also said, right? Like I've seen an increasing number of people say these things and use the same language I've been telling you because it's very obvious, right? This is playing out. This is what we saw coming from the beginning. Nobody is surprised by this. Anybody with half a brain who understands the situation, literally, we all spelled it out to you. We told you Hamas was going to create new organizations and operate under the name of those organizations as if they're not Hamas, even though they obviously are. And they pick, a police force that's, not really a separate police force. It's just Hamas under a different name. They're going to pick, leaders that are not really separate from Hamas. They just operate under a different name. They're going to do all these things to pretend like they're following the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. But if you scratch, not even below the surface, just scratch the surface, you'll see that's still in the middle of the muck, right there on top of the surface. There is, in fact, a lot of shenanigans that they're doing. Yeah, I'll use the word shenanigans that they're doing that are actually bad. And that are against the spirit of the deal. Anyway, so that is the long and short of what is happening with the deal right now, with the Trump deal, and the probability of us seeing a positive outcome of that deal, meaning the possibility that the deal will succeed and actually bring about an end to the war and a path forward towards real peace. Now, on top of that, there have been reports, throw as much salt as you need onto them as necessary, but there have been reports of a recent survey coming out of Gaza that says that if Hamas were to run right now in an election, that they would win overwhelmingly in Gaza, and that people now support Hamas more than they did on October 7th. The very same people that everyone in the world calls, oh, those innocent Palestinians. Yeah, there are innocent Palestinians in Gaza. But don't pretend like a lot of them don't support Hamas still. A lot of them still do, which is evident. And it was evident the entire 2 years, and it was even more evident when people found out, oh, Palestinians in Gaza were actually offered $5 million and a new life, basically, new identity, new home outside of the Gaza Strip, anywhere in the world that they wanted, basically. Take your new identity, take your family. $5 million if you give information to the IDF or to Israel in general that leads to the discovery of where there are hostages or hostage remains, like living hostages or dead hostages remains. Just information. You don't have to actually, doesn't actually have to lead to the capture of any terrorists. So you don't actually have to betray anyone, right? You can just give information. If you know where a body is, or you know about somebody who knows about it, or you know about, where you might find more information about it, etc. Like, pretty easy to get that $5 million bag. And as far as we know, I mean, obviously, the government is going to go out and tell you, yeah, we found these bodies thanks to the help of anonymous sources or something like that, because they don't want to put in danger the lives of the people that have helped them. But as far as we know, not a single body was recovered thanks to help from anonymous sources or even anonymous sources. What are anonymous sources? Sources with names. Sources who aren't afraid to say that they helped. Right? So we haven't had a single person actually help the IDF, as far as we know, help Israel at all, to locate a single hostage, dead or alive. Remember, there were people literally living in apartments with them. They knew exactly where they were. And we're not talking about like UNRWA doctors, right? Teachers, UNRWA teachers could have made millions of dollars and had a new life somewhere. And they were technically not part of Hamas, so, they wouldn't have been betraying an organization they belonged to or something like that. Some of them were part of Hamas, but there were some that weren't. They would have just been employees of the UN who suddenly got really rich and moved to, or really rich, relatively to a life in Gaza if you're a typical person. Obviously, there's plenty of people in Gaza with a lot more money than that. And there's plenty of people in Gaza with a lot less money than that, right? They're practically nothing. So, if you ever were wondering, well, how do you know that the Hamas isn't living up to the spirit of the agreement? This is the effect of them being in control of Gaza for 20 years. They have effectively brainwashed an entire population. And I know you can tell me, well, there were some people who probably would have loved to take the $5 million in Gaza, but they just simply didn't know. And yes, there probably are some people in Gaza who would have loved to take the money and simply didn't know because they weren't allowed to get close enough to where the hostages were. So they didn't actually have information that could lead to the discovery of the bodies. Right? So they were never trusted enough because they're in gangs that oppose Hamas. They're considered enemies. They don't dare go into the neighborhoods where the bodies likely were, or they didn't know that the bodies were being held in areas that they thought they were in control of. Whatever the case may be, those who didn't couldn't help.
But the many people who did know,
who live in the areas where the bodies were being held and where the living hostages were being held, not a one of them came forward, as far as we know. Right? There are no accusations from Hamas for $5 million in Rand, because obviously there were no people who took the money in Rand. And yes, they killed people for being collaborators after Israel pulled back to the 50% line, which means they're still chasing collaborators, as they always do, and executing them brutally in public, as they always do. Even when they don't actually prove that the person's a collaborator, they just summarily accuse people and execute them in public. That's their thing, right? So they don't really care if the facts lead to show that a person that they accuse is actually a so-called collaborator or not. And the fact that it's tolerated that they kill so-called collaborators, when collaborators means people who are trying to stop terrorism, right? The fact that there is no actual consequence for doing that kind of tells you everything you need to know about the situation, right? The Hamas is allowed to continue carrying on assassinating people that have done nothing wrong, that have put their life on the line to protect other people. You can say it was for money, doesn't matter. They still put their life on the line to protect other people. But they put themselves at risk for doing that. And in the cases where collaborators are caught and killed, they literally lost their lives to protect other people. And there's no actual consequence. Like, do you see the problem here, Houston? You understand why it is a bad thing that these people are allowed to continue killing people that they just blindly accuse of something without proof, and then also kill did help to stop terrorism? What are you going? Yasha is you? Yes. What, Yaakov is you? No, not Yaakov and Yasha. I know you can say it's the same name. There was a UFO. Yeah, okay. Here's a question. War on drugs. Would you include suicide pills the British troops were given when they were set to fight the war in Iraq? What does that have to do with the war on drugs? Sorry. Hey, brother, I'm from the UK. What's your take on immigration and them issues? Well, if you're in the UK, hello, shalom. The UK is a very interesting situation because it is an avoidable situation that was not avoided due to immigration policy. It can still be reversed, right? Right now, you have roughly 4 million Muslim immigrants, just for an example, in the UK. 4 million out of around 70 million people in the UK. So you're talking around 6% of the population is made of just Muslim immigrants, for example. And of those 6%, how many are a problem really? 1 in 10? 2 in 10? 1 in 20? What's the number? So roughly say 1 in 10, okay? 1 in 10 means 400,000 out of the 4 million are a problem. That doesn't mean they're on the terror watch list or anything like that. That means that they're a problem. In the broader sense, they protest against the country that hosts them. They want to undermine the country, legally or not, doesn't matter. They don't share the values of the country that has hosted them, that has welcomed them, and they want to undermine it. Okay? It doesn't matter if they want to undermine it legally or not. They want to undermine it. That's what matters. Those people, in my opinion, should not be allowed to be in your country. Those people should be deported, in my opinion. to their home country, especially if it's found in any way that they lied in order to gain access to the UK, which happens quite a lot. And instead of deporting them, you give them a slap on the wrist. Oh, you shouldn't have done it. No. That's not okay. They lied because they knew that if they told the truth, they wouldn't be let in the first place. Because they weren't really refugees to begin with. Right? They might have gotten a letter from the government in order to get in to the UK. So they asked the government from the country that they came from, hey, can you give me one of those letters that can be read in a way that if they read it and they don't see my passport, and all I have is this letter, and I say I don't have any other documents, that they'll sympathize with me and give me refugee status in their country, which then increases the burden on their resources for housing, for medical issues, for education, etc. Right, healthcare, whatever. And their governments are happy to oblige because that's exactly their strategy, is to weaken the UK from within. What better way to do that is there than to give these people some kind of, fake political asylum letter, basically, stamped and certified by the very government, causing them to be refugees, supposedly, right? So let's say you live in wherever, Iran or Syria or Nigeria or anywhere, and you get that government to write you a letter saying this person is not, is a problem for us, and we need to do something, and we put you on some kind of a political watch list, or they have ways of wording the language of the letter to make it clear that their life is under threat, or at the very least their freedom is under threat, and that if they were to go back to their home country, they might be punished in some terrible way that is clearly unjust. And then they get that letter, put it in a nice little plastic cover, and they lose their documents once they stop using their passport, etc. They suddenly lose it magically as soon as they cross the border of their country and enter Europe somewhere. Suddenly they no longer have their passport. Right? And if they walk all the way across, from very far away even, take boats or whatever, no problem. They have their documents the whole time. As soon as they need that document at the border of the country that they are trying to get into, that otherwise will not let them in unless they don't have a passport, but they do have a letter of refugee status, right? Because without a passport, the government that's receiving the refugee can't say, well, you don't have a passport, but you have a passport, so you can go somewhere else with that letter. Without a passport, they can claim asylum at whatever border they get to and say, oh, I'd love to go somewhere else, but I can't go anywhere else. I don't have any other documents. You're my only, you save me, Luke, you're my only hope, kind of thing. And that's exactly how and why there are so many people coming into your country, because that's what they're doing, among other things. So is that a problem? Yeah, that's a huge problem. I think folks like Tommy Robinson are bringing awareness to it, and certainly it's important that it be dealt with sooner rather than later. But I think you also should not overblow it and get hysterical about 6% of the population when you can easily deal with that situation of, let's say 40,000. Say even on the crazy side, say 80,000 people are a problem, of which the real number of then within that 80,000, you're probably talking around, more than that are actually, like critical, right? That you need to like stop immediately. It's still in the thousands, but it's not tens of thousands. Yeah, it's like a much smaller group overall, and it's very possible to deal with that with even the size of the existing British police force and or military. It's not something that you need to panic about and think, oh no, we're not going to have enough resources to deal with this. You definitely have enough resources to deal with this. Question of priorities. It's a matter of resource management. That's really all it comes down to. So I hope sincerely that you will get the type of actions that you need to reduce and remove that problem from your shores. But you still have time, a little bit. So there's still some years ahead of you in which you have to deal with this. It's not like you have to deal with this today or tomorrow. There will be the end of England. But the sooner the better, right? We have the same fight. We're on the same side, Israel and the UK. Anyway, I'll catch you guys later. For now, peace. Shalom.